Yeah, thanks everyone for being here. It's super nice to see friendly faces. And today I'm going to talk about hyperspectral soil albedo in climate models. I would like to thank my collaborators and the funding agencies, NASA, the Resnick Institute at Caltech, and the Schmidt Foundation for Klima. So I would like to start with this famous plots about the evolution of our system models, particularly looking into the land surface. So here I show the land carbon uptake simulated by 11 Earth system models in the latest 3 CMIP exercises from pre-industrial times up until the end of the century. And what we can see is that these individual models disagree substantially, not only on the sign, but also the magnitude of the land uptake. And it seems like along CMIP exercises, we don't seem to be convergent with time. The reasons for this non-convergence are innumerous, and we can spend the whole AGU talking about that, parametric versus structural uncertainties in those models. But I would like to call your attention for the first reason given by the IPCC report, which is the transfer of radiation, water, and heat in the vegetation soil atmospheric continuum are treated very simply in these Earth system models. And what do we mean by very simply? So as Tristan mentioned at the beginning, these models usually along all these Earth system models use the two-stream scheme in the land surface or something related to the two-stream scheme. And why do we still use a model that was developed in the 80s nowadays? Well, some of the reasons are that the model is computationally efficient. And so if we need to run climate simulations for the entire globe for so many years, it makes sense to have a model that is fast. The second reason is that it requires very few parameters to parameterize the model. And in the 80s, we didn't have observation related to surface reflectance to actually determine what would happen hyperspectrally. In reality, we know since our friend Newton here, 1672, that light is made of colors. And so the idea that these Earth system models divide the shortwave spectrum in 2 bands makes sense because the far red edge, if we think about vegetation, so plants photosynthesize only using visible light and everything else can be considered separately. But as we can see here in this hyperspectral data set, the green line showing the vegetation and the yellow line showing soil, we can see that this all hyperspectral curve contains a lot of information about leaf pigments, the cell structure, water content, and so on. So now that we have more and more hyperspectral sensors orbiting Earth and flying on planes, should our Earth system models also move hyperspectrally? And most of my work has been done in the past to improve these models by considering a heterogeneous structure. But now I'm actually thinking about, should we also care about the spectral resolution of these models? So first of all, should we care? I mean, it's not because we can do something, we should do something, right? So the first question is, how much we gain by going hyperspectral in our system models? So I follow up with 2 questions. The first one is, what is the bias in soil albedo between the broadband and the hyperspectral cases? And to do that, we had to develop a hyperspectral soil albedo model globally, which was not available. The second question is, okay, if there is a bias, what is the impact of the soil albedo bias on actual climate simulations? And so we have to run a climate model and compare the performance. So first off, we developed this global map of hyperspectral soil albedo, and all the results that I'm going to show here is thinking about hyperspectral reflectance in soils, but we can think analogously to the vegetation as well. And what we did was to use the CLM5 color map idea, which was derived from MODIS reflectance. And basically what we do is to run the same 2-stream scheme and use MODIS reflectance as our observations and use the soil albedo to close the energy balance using climatological leaf area index values and soil moisture content values. This was developed for CLM, and most Earth system models use this idea of like a fixed broadband soil albedo background. So what we did was to use a machine learning algorithm called GSV model that was trained with more than 20,000 soil samples, hyperspectral. And we then used this machine learning algorithm to make a hyperspectral curve from the two broadband curve in CLM globally. And so we generated this map at 0.2 degree resolution. Here I show some independent validation. So we had in the continental United States, some independent validation, some independent observation of hyperspectral data, including combination of average in this map. And we can see that the global map using machine learning is quite, has a pretty good agreement with the independent data, but also a good agreement with a lower RMSE between the hyperspectral curve and observations versus the broadband curve and observations. So now we take the bias, we subtract one global map, the broadband and the hyperspectral one, and what we get is something like this. So we get the orange curve being the hyperspectral average global soil albedo, and the blue curve being the broadband one. And when we take the delta albedo, we get something like that. So on average in the planet, we can get a bias of minus or plus 4%. But when we go for particular wavelengths, we get values that can be different, can differ at up 20%, particularly in desert areas. What does that mean for radiative forcing? Well, radiative forcing is then multiplying this delta albedo, this bias, by the actual irradiance reaching the surface hyperspectrally. And what we get is that for individual wavelengths, this radiative bias can be up to 30 watts per meter square, which is a lot. When we integrate it spectrally, we get a bias of 3.55 watts per meter square. So what would be the impact of this 3 watts of extra energy in the whole climate system? And so to do that, we parameterize CLM5. And the idea is that the CLIMA model that is being developed at Caltech is hyperspectral, but we still do not have a couple atmosphere with the land. So we need to parameterize CLM to answer the question. And what we did was to assume that all diffuse radiation was biased towards the blue, and all direct radiation was biased towards the red for high sun zenith angles. And what we did then was to run CLM for 50 years, coupled with COM6, so a couple run of atmosphere and land together for 50 years, and we looked into the final 30 years and took the climatological average. And here are some results. I'm not going to go through all the differences in the model for the sake of time, but I can tell you that changes were observed throughout the climate system, including energy, water, carbon variables. We didn't run a biogeochemical mode on, but I suppose that if it was on, we would see differences in the nutrient cycles as well. But here I will show you four variables that we evaluated and compared against. So for precipitation, all sky albedo, latent heat, and photosynthesis, the global values were show reduced bias when we account for differentiation in between blue and red light in these climate models. And so we were able to find some improvements in climate simulations by increasing the spectral resolution. And finally, just to take home messages. So we found the soil albedo biases between the broadband case and the hyperspectral cases can be significant for particular wavelengths, reaching up to 20% over desert areas, California and the Sahara. And then we can also see impacts throughout the climate system, precipitation patterns, temperature at the surface, photosynthesis, and latent heat as well. And so the final message is then, yes, the new generation Earth system models should work towards increasing spectral resolution as well in order to work towards reducing uncertainty. Thank you for your attention. I will stop here. Here's my email, my Twitter. Please feel free to reach out. And yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Renato. Very interesting talk. So any questions from the audience? I have a question. So how many bands do you think Earth system model should have?
I don't know.
I mean, it's super computationally expensive, could be. And is there a balance point, do you think?
there's probably a balance, right? And I think like when we actually can, because this was a parameterization, I had to change CLM to just account for 2 particular wavelengths. But I guess we can ask this question again when we actually have a Earth system model that is hyperspectral and it is coupled with the atmosphere. So then we could find this sweet spot in between how high spectral resolution should we have to actually get better predictions. But that, yeah, I don't know the answer, but that's a great question. Yeah.
Yeah. Hi, Renato. Great talk. I have 2 questions. First is about, here you consider the soil albedo, broadband, and hyperspectral. How about leaf? Yeah. Leaf, vegetation, leaf reflectance, transmittance is also very important. Yeah. Another question is here, the atmospheric model need the input of the land surface albedo. So how, I don't know how many bands are used in the atmospheric radiation transfer model, but I think you need to should be identical. Yeah. So how do you consider these questions when you run in the coupled CESN model?
Yeah, these are great questions. So first, your question. So here I just did this exercise for soil albedo, and to get a soil albedo, a global map of soil albedo hyperspectrally, we had to use some machine learning, right? For the vegetation, that would be much more complex because we would have to train not only with the soil spectral data, but with lots of traits and more complex things going on in the vegetation. So yeah, there is to come. I think the next step is actually thinking what would happen if the vegetation is also hyperspectral. The second question is totally right, and this connection between how many bands the atmospheric radiative transfer model and the land surface model have, it's already a current problem in our current Earth system models, right? If I'm not mistaken, the CAM radiative transfer has many more bands than CLM. And so there is some sort of integration and averaging done at the moment, but that will be an interesting question as well. And if they were aligned, and yes, I think that's going to be better than whatever we do today.
Thank you.
Yes, Hassan.
Thanks, Renato. It was a nice talk. But you showed the pattern of the bias between the 2 stream and then the hyperspectral one globally. Did you analyze to see those patterns are very distinct? There are areas in the tropics and there are areas in the northern hemisphere that shows up that plot, the global one, and your conclusion. Yes. There's certain features that comes out of this. Do you have an analysis of what is causing these patterns?
So no, we actually ran the model and just did a global comparison. But yes, when you look at individual areas and the observation derived products for validation, some places we get a better agreement and some other places we get a worse agreement, actually. On average, the bias is reduced, but definitely, I think when we go further into this, we have to evaluate why those particular places get better or worse.
Especially like if boreal forest, the albedo is so different, that can have a major effect on the response to climate in those regions and warming and stuff. So
right, and it's right there above region there, so folks pay attention to that.
All right. Thanks, Renato.
Thank you.
Yeah, let's move forward to Dr. Shuang from University of Illinois.